That's gunowners.org. Tell them Dr. Gina sent you. Gunowners.org.
Hey, I heard you were a wild one. Ooh. Hey, I heard you were a wild one. Show me how you do. I wanna shut down and look down with you. Hey, I heard you were a wild one. Ooh.
And you are listening to the Dr. Gina Show. Cannot get that mic where I want it today. Sorry. I just can't leave it alone. Can't leave it alone. Well, there is a new study. LifeNews.com reports. Oh, look at that. Scientists have corrected. I just don't even like this wording. This is the Guardian story, actually. This is the Life News quoting the Guardian story. Scientists have corrected the genetic fault that causes Down syndrome, albeit in isolated cells, raising the prospect of a radical therapy for the, they call it a disorder. I don't like any of that verbiage, and I am not somebody that's politically correct. You can use the word retarded right in front of me. I think it's actually very, very fitting. I have other parents of children with Down syndrome that disagree with me strongly. I don't care. I'm not politically correct, but words that are derogatory, well, I don't want to get distracted. I just don't call it a genetic fault, and I just don't call it a correction, and I just don't call it a disorder. Let's just get that out of the way. This series of experiments where U.S. researchers have taken cells from people with Down syndrome and silenced the extra chromosome that actually causes Down syndrome. They believe they can do this. It is a major step in chromosome therapy and would eradicate Down syndrome for all intents and purposes, because there would be very, very, very few born. There already are very, very, very few born. More than 90% of people with Down syndrome are aborted. And this is a hard one, because you want the best for your children. So it's just very, I'm in a parents group and we were discussing this, and I'm going to be writing a story on this as well. But, it's difficult because you want the best for your children. We certainly don't want the health ailments that come with Down syndrome. Certainly not the mental problems that come later in life, often falling to dementia before the age of 60. Early death. Thyroid problems, heart problems, other things. So you want all that fixed. And certainly you want to give your child every intellectual advantage in life that you possibly can. But the thought of a world without anyone in it who has Down syndrome, it just sounds horrible to me. And the other thing that I think that...
people are going to say you're horrible for saying this.
You know what? Say away. I have loved people with Down syndrome all of my life. And I'm going to say this, they're smarter than us in some ways. And I don't know how to explain that unless you know them and have lived among them. But they have an ability to teach things that you can't learn anywhere else. So call me horrible. Bring it. I chose to adopt my child with Down syndrome very consciously. I tried for 10 years. I paid tens of thousands of dollars to try to get him. I wanted that presence in my life because it is truly unique and special, and because I knew how much he had to give the world, and I wanted a child who might otherwise be aborted to have a chance to bring what he has to offer to the rest of the world. And so if that's terrible, guilty. I can't imagine, looking at people with Down syndrome and thinking they wouldn't be there anymore. I think the world would have lost something huge. At the same time, would I stop that research? Absolutely not. I wouldn't stop it. But do I think that there's great ambivalence in it? And do I think that there is real emotional toil for parents of people with Down syndrome. And then there's something to be said about the way this makes people with Down syndrome feel. I like the way this was put. Opponents of the human exceptionalism and its corollary, the equal moral worth of all people, often challenge others about Down syndrome. And the writer of this person from The Guardian says, I strongly oppose eugenic abortion that is currently taking the lives of 90% of our brothers and sisters with Down syndrome. So they say, well, would you treat it if there were a way to treat it? And so aren't you saying it is better for the person not to have Down syndrome than to have it? And if that is true, don't people with Down syndrome have a lesser value? And he answers that question like this. He says, yes, to the question, would you treat it if a way were found? Yes, unequivocally yes. And if so, are you saying it's better for the person not to have Down syndrome than to have it? Yes, unequivocally yes. But does that mean that people with Down syndrome have a lesser value? Emphatically no. I agree with this author. The wording was a bit strange, but I agree with this author, and I think that I don't know. It's going to be something that I think that the world will lose. I think the only ones who gain in this possibly are the actual people with Down syndrome, but the world will lose something amazing without these people. And this is one other thing I worry about, to be completely honest with you. Real minorities in our culture who can't defend themselves. I'm not talking about minorities that deem themselves minorities who are perfectly capable and competent under the Constitution of helping themselves. I'm talking about true minorities that truly cannot help themselves. I'm talking about the elderly, the infirm. I'm talking about babies that aren't born yet and people with Down syndrome. When you don't have groups of parents and siblings and folks who know them to advocate for their civil rights, I do worry about their civil rights. I worry very much about their civil rights. I mean, their civil rights have already been trounced with abortion. Now everyone goes and gets a triple test, and 90% of those who go get that triple test and find out they're going to have a baby with Down syndrome, it blows their image of that little perfect baby that they thought they could have, and they abort it because that's the easy answer. While there are hundreds of families waiting, the Ohio Clearinghouse for Down syndrome, hundreds of families waiting to adopt a baby with Down syndrome. I waited on that list for 10 years. I went to Planned Parenthood every year on my birthday, all the Planned Parenthoods in my bi-state area, and said, if you will tell a woman who's going to have a baby with Down syndrome or possibly other situations that I would be willing to adopt that baby, if you would let her know that, if you would hand her these pictures of our family that we would like to adopt a baby who's going to be aborted, if you would just let them know if they're ambivalent or something. And I was received in every one of those instances with a hostility. Why would you bother us with this? We're not an adoption agency. We're Planned Parenthood. We're the abortion industry. We're about eugenics of imperfect people, whether the imperfection in Margaret Sanger's view was someone with Down syndrome, someone with multiple, what am I trying to say? Not multiple sclerosis, cerebral palsy, someone with a spinal cord disorder, someone who is black, someone who is Hispanic. This is the definition of the founder of Planned Parenthood's idea of what needed to be eradicated. Now, she never did say she wanted to eradicate people with Down syndrome. She only wanted to eradicate black people. Excuse me for the inference, but I imagine if she wanted to eradicate black people, and that was the initial purpose of Planned Parenthood, that people with Down syndrome and people with cerebral palsy and people with, spina bifida would fit in her definition of who needed to be eradicated, right?
Yeah, that
It's
stands
a
to reason.
logical conclusion. And if for 10 years I had to make phone calls asking for one baby to adopt, to bring into a family that would love it, not a perfect family, just a family that really loves people with Down syndrome. We knew because we volunteered for the Down Syndrome Association, for the Pujols Foundation. We knew that this is what we wanted as a family. People can judge us all day long, and they do. I still get hateful letters about that we set out to adopt someone with Down syndrome as if that somehow made us bigoted. I don't get that either. But if that is such an unwarranted phone call for Planned Parenthood, imagine what happens when that parental pool of hundreds of thousands or millions of people advocating on behalf of people with Down syndrome whittles its way down to only a few who happened not to have any prenatal testing, didn't know they were pregnant with a baby with Down syndrome, and therefore didn't abort or correct the situation, correct using the term in the way that the article uses the term, the situation. I think that could be tragic for those people. And then you have the issue that goes even broader than this, and that is people in other countries who don't have access to these tests or these genetic situations where they can change things in the womb. What will happen to those babies in those, let's say, second and third world countries? So these are some of my concerns. Anyway, we'll be talking more about that. I'll be writing about that. And coming up on the show, Jim Bob Duggar from 19 Kids and Counting. He's going to tell us about his opinion of the heartbeat bill. Wait until you hear about the common sense of this bill. Stay tuned for more right after this. You're listening to The Dr. Gina Show.